This video is going to serve not only as the conclusion to my 3 Final Fantasy XIII videos, but also as a Cliff Notes version of the otherwise 1 hour and a half 3 video series that I have for those who just want to know the best and worst things about each game. As evident from those 3 videos, I really do like this trilogy and probably is excluded from the majority of people that played the games. But if you haven't watched the 3 videos I made about the series, then I hope this video is more than enough to relay my points as to why this trilogy is actually pretty great and it's worth to at least give them a try. Without further ado, let's begin with the first game. I think the best thing about the first game is how simple and straightforward its gameplay is. And yes, that is an allegory to its linear nature. But you know, it's a game that not only offers you ridiculous abilities that can push your damage to the skies, it also allows you to equip 4 accessories that have absolutely ridiculous stats, as well as an indefinite debuff count on enemies that just makes every encounter unfair for your enemies. It's just fun to hunt down all those big monsters you see on the field effortlessly, or defeat the boss a second time before it even gets the chance to do actual damage to you. It's just pure plain fun. You don't need to do complicated theory crafting when equipping items on your characters, and since all characters have access to most of the abilities of the different roles, you can pretty much roll with whomever you like the most from the 6 available characters. It's like having the freedom to put whatever clothes you want on your MMORPG character, but it's party members instead. And I know that I'm crazy for saying this, but I think Final Fantasy XIII is the most visually pleasing out of all the 3 games, even without HD mods installed. I think this is why Square Enix is putting claims on videos that have cutscenes from this game. Paired with how the game is pretty much just an interactive movie that has numerous amounts of cutscenes in between gameplay, you can pretty much skip all the gameplay stuff, watch the various cutscenes that occur in the game, and you have practically played the game yourself. And it looks pretty good to boot. The biggest downside for me personally is the lack of post-game content, which I have heavily addressed in my dedicated video to Final Fantasy XIII. Even though you can make your characters as powerful as you want them to be, you pretty much don't have anything to try them out on. Even the ridiculous enemies from the Titan Trials aren't that big of a deal because they're not super bosses or anything. They're just buffed up regular enemies. Grinding also becomes monotonous at some point, especially if you're hunting for the elusive Treasure Hunter achievement. It's just such a fun achievement to get. Like sure, I know I said that it's fun to hunt down the enemies in the field with your ridiculous characters, but the prices and drop rates for the components that you need in order to get all items in the game are just so absurd, it will suck the fun out of the game pretty quickly, no matter how fun kicking an enemy's ass is in this game. But I think all of these are addressed in the second game, and using this as the segue to talk about the sequel, let's move on to 13-2. Final Fantasy 13-2's strongest suit in my honest shitty opinion is its minute changes to its gameplay that made it more coherent and seamless than its predecessor. And it's also the thing that ultimately differentiated 13-2 from Final Fantasy 13. The most annoying thing about the first game's combat is how the flow is continuously interrupted every time you switch paradigms. For some reason, Square Enix decided that you have to see an animation every time you switch to a different paradigm, and while it is quite fun for the first 10 hours of the game where you still play with limited preformed parties, it gets old pretty quickly, especially during the open world sequence of the game and when you inevitably grind to enhance your characters. It becomes really mind-numbing and not a chance would pass that you'll wish the game didn't show you this animation as you've seen it a million times. Not to mention that you can still get hit by enemy attacks during it, making it really counterintuitive to be included in the game. With Square removing this from 13-2 makes its combat infinitely better and smoother than the previous game, and that alone is the majority of the reason why 13-2 is the better game. The game also introduced the ability to further tweak paradigms, so characters just don't follow what the paradigm says they should do. For example, the Cerberus paradigm tells your characters to attack different enemies all at once. But with the addition of changing target priorities, namely the wide and cross feature when setting up paradigms, you can now use the Cerberus paradigm to single out an enemy in a group if you want to, or make your characters use AoE abilities like Ruinga to damage more enemies than they normally would if they were to use single target abilities. It's a lot more customization and players aren't just stuck with how certain paradigms generally works. And also, like I said earlier, the game has proper post-game content through its super bosses included in one of the DLCs which are just fun to attempt to beat. I have already mentioned all of this in my video dedicated to 13.2, but they're really just neat and, dare I say, necessary changes to the game that I have to reiterate it here. Excluding the shitty port of the game because that's to be expected from a Square Enix port, the worst thing about 13.2 is how major story bosses become stupidly easy when you grind before fighting them. In the first game, character progression is locked behind the story, so you really can't overlevel enemies in a particular chapter or area of the game, which makes bosses relatively challenging even if you max your characters out. But since 13.2 removed that limitation and you are free to progress through your character's Crystarium to the max anytime you want, the challenge just sort of disappears. Not only is it bad for people looking for a challenging experience, it also creates a ludonarrative dissonance, which is something that I'm more concerned with. One of the major bosses in this game is supposed to be someone very powerful that only a few can stand up against, and even Lightning, who has powers bestowed upon her by a goddess, has trouble defeating him. And yet, with your very overleveled character, he becomes a pushover, requiring only 2 to 3 hits from one character to be defeated. And then the game proceeds to show you a cutscene that your character is having a hard time fighting him, which really doesn't just make sense when you just whoop his ass a few seconds ago. I know ludonarrative is a highly debated topic when it comes to video games, but this just shows that giving players free reign on how much they can strengthen their character without scaling enemies to at least match their strength creates a very huge problem, not just from a narrative standpoint, but also when it comes to gameplay. And then we get to Lightning Returns. What can I say? Lightning Returns is a pretty good game, so much better than I remember it to be. Since it's a game that doesn't really follow the formula of the first 2 games, it really feels like a standalone game and not a sequel to 13.2, even though of course that's false because it's the direct sequel and takes place right after the events of 13.2. Well, 500 years after that, but my point still stands. But I think Square completely changing how Lightning Returns plays is a very good move as it removes the staleness that's already building up from the very similar gameplay that the first and second game had. They can change as many things as they like to make the game unique, but the chocolate cake and the vanilla cake only change on how they taste. They're still both cakes at the end of the day. Lightning Returns is neither a chocolate cake or a vanilla cake. It is an entirely different dessert. Lightning Returns also changed the way that characters can become stronger. As I've mentioned in my video about Lightning Returns, Lightning can only become stronger whenever the player finishes a quest, side quest or otherwise, as well as equipping higher tier equipment that give better stats. It also has a very deep combat system that truly deviates from the other 2 games. It still works very similarly to the mechanics of the first games, like staggering enemies and whatnot, but requirements needed to achieve this as well as the different combat mechanics in general just make this game a lot more unique and not just a mirror skin of the first game. The game imposes a time limit on the player which makes them feel more pressured about the inevitable end of the world, which really makes things much more immersive. Combined with the time of day system that allows players to only meet certain NPCs or go to certain areas on a specific time of day makes Lightning Returns very different from its predecessors. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Lightning Returns is the best Final Fantasy XIII game. If I have to name one bad thing about Lightning Returns, it's the fact that the story is pretty much very disconnected from the first 2 games. The only connection this game has to 13.2 is the fact that it happened 500 years after the events of the latter and uses that as the foundation of the game's plot. Other than that though, Lightning Returns feels like it threw everything the first 2 games had established down the drain and made an entirely new narrative to push, including adding totally new higher beings, namely the gods, that were nowhere to be found in the first 2 games. Hopefully everything that I've said in this video is enough to at least make you want to try the games out instead of just brushing them off because of the numerous complaints that you see on the internet. I know this video isn't really that good and listing out just a couple of positives and negatives about a game doesn't really explain that much, aside from the fact that I really just suck at explaining. So I really urge you to check out the dedicated videos that I've made about the games, which include more detailed explanations about how good these games are, as well as dive into its problems as well. I may love this series, but I'm trying to be as subjective about it as possible, and so, of course, I included the bad things as well. I will leave the playlist to those videos down in the description. I will be grateful if you take the time to check them out. And so, to answer the question in the title of this video, yes, the Trilogy is worth playing even in 2022. The Final Fantasy XIII Trilogy will always be infamous, not just from its shitty ports, but also because of the game's sometimes incoherent, fragmented stories and narrative. But at the end of the day, there's no denying the fact that they are all very enjoyable games.